absolutely perfect for this role. So she was hired. So then, on a very early draft copy, or just a very early draft of the first few pages, Billy Wilder and Charles Brackett had written at the top of their script that they wanted Montgomery Clift to play Joe Gillis. And at that time, he was like riding high in Hollywood. He had been in Red River with John Wayne, which was a huge success. He had been in The Heiress with Olivia de Havilland, which had also been a massive hit for Paramount. So he was massive box office draw, and he was also considered like one of the most beautiful men in Paramount. So he signed on to do the picture. And so what happened after this? Montgomery Clift called Paramount and Billy Wilder in spring of 1949, several weeks before they were shooting Sunset Boulevard, and said that he felt that he could not believably make love to an older woman. Oh. Now the film, I know. Oh, let me tell you what happened though. So he had just made the film The Heiress with Olivia de Havilland, where it was like his character was trying to trap this very rich woman in a romantic affair. So in some ways, he had made love to an older woman. So that made Billy Wilder incensed. He was like, why would you go to work for William Wyler on The Heiress to make that film, but not come and work for me on Sunset Boulevard and make love to an older woman? Anyway, so many have suspected, including Charles Brackett, that in reality, Montgomery Clift, at the time he was 29 years old, had a 45-year-old lover named Elizabeth or Libby Holman, who was a socialite, had lots of money, and they thought that she had gotten an outline of his script and read it and been like, oh, this is about me. Because she had tried to be in silent films, or she had tried to be in films too. So she told Montgomery Clift, no way will you make that film. Also, on the evening of July 5th, 1932, Libby Holman, who was 28 at the time, her 21-year-old husband was found shot to death in their home in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. She was indicted for murder and eventually acquitted, as they believed it to be suicide. So they thought that she got an outline of the script and was like, oh, hell no, you are not making this movie. Well, because Charles Brackett had moved in the same circles as Libby Holman in the 1920s. So Libby Holman thought that Charles Brackett had just like taken her life story and was like, we're going to write this. And she was like, no, you will not be in this movie. So Montgomery Clift pulled out. So what then happened was William Holden had first kind of risen to fame in a film, I think it was 1939 at Columbia with Barbara Stanwyck, called Golden Boy. And he had risen to fame very quickly. And then he right after that made a film called Our Town, which was the adaptation of Thornton Wilder's play. Our Town, and since then his career had he had worked consistently, but it had fizzled out. I mean, by 1947, 1948, he was starring in B romantic comedy pictures at Paramount, like the film Apartment for Peggy, where Peggy was trying to find an apartment for herself and he was playing her husband. So he was very much a contract player at Paramount of the lowest degree. So in 1948, 1949, I'm not sure exactly if Billy Wilder saw him or an executive at Paramount and was like, okay, we have a film, we have to fill this, let's shoot William Holden into that spot. But anyway, he finished filming one film at Paramount and then had a day off and then started in on Sunset Boulevard. So he was really just like studio fodder. They didn't think much of William Holden. But it was Sunset Boulevard that revitalized his career. And then he became top 10 box office stars during the 1950s because of Sunset Boulevard revitalizing his career. So then let's talk about Nancy Olson. Nancy Olson was only a year or two into her contract with Paramount at the time. She was a student at UCLA, but she was being paid $5,000 a picture at Paramount, which William Holden was being paid $30,000 a picture. Gloria Swanson was paid $50,000 to make Sunset Boulevard. So she was very early on in her career. She had only made one picture in 1949 called Canadian Pacific with Randolph Scott. And Billy Wilder had seen her in that, and he wanted some very beautiful, new, fresh, young face. And the Hollywood film magazines were referring to Nancy Olson as Wholesome Olson. So she said she got a call and they said, Billy Wilder wants you for his next picture. And she originally thought that she would be the lead. Because Cecil B. DeMille had considered her for Delilah in Samson and Delilah, which went to Hedy Lamarr. That would have been a very interesting Samson and Delilah had it been Nancy Olson. But anyway, she was a very young, fresh-faced girl, like she was in the movie. So again, her character and herself mirrored each other very closely. Now let's talk about Erich von Stroheim. Because along with Gloria Swanson, he very closely mirrors his character in the film. He was originally from Vienna, Austria-Hungary, and immigrated to the U.S. in 1909. He was known something as of a mad genius when it came to directing. He was known as a film director that was very prominent in directing like high art pictures. He was a mad genius. He'd spend a lot of money on one picture, make it very long, very high production values. So he was always kind of in conflict with the studio heads, because they wanted to commercialize the film and he wanted to make it high art. And then in 1924, he was making a film for Metro Studios called Greed. And then Metro, Goldwyn, and Mayer merged and they made MGM. And so then his film fell under the supervision of Louis B. Mayer and Irving Thalberg, who were the two heads at MGM. And Greed is a very, very long novel. He was convinced that he was going to shoot every page in the novel, which he did. He went way over budget. The original cut was 9 hours. I believe Irving Thalberg and Louis B. Mayer went in and cut it down to 3 or 4 hours. And it was still considered like a very big high art picture. But after that, because Louis B. Mayer was known as kind of the king of Hollywood, he was one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. He was kind of banned from motion pictures making. I mean, he made a few after that, but he wasn't as prominent in the Hollywood scene as he had been before Greed. And then in 1928, Gloria Swanson's career was kind of on the fritz. And so she wanted to make a high art picture that would make a lot of money. So even though she knew of Erich von Stroheim's reputation, she reached out to him and said, hey, I want to make a film off of this story called Queen Kelly. And Queen Kelly was produced, interestingly enough, by Gloria Swanson's lover, Joseph Kennedy, who spent lots of money on making this movie. Joseph Kennedy is Bobby's and JFK's father.
Really?
Yes, she had an affair with him. So they produced the film. They were shooting it in Europe. And Gloria Swanson eventually called Joseph Kennedy and said, this man is a madman. You fire him right away. So they fired him. They recut the picture. It wasn't as great as they thought it was originally going to be. It never got a U.S. release, so it flopped. They released it in Europe. And it wasn't as, like I said, it wasn't as successful as they thought it was going to be. So she had a history. Gloria Swanson had a history with Erich von Stroheim, just like Norma Desmond had a history with Max von Mayerling. But by the time they got to shooting Sunset Boulevard in 1949, apparently they had resolved their issues because there was no reported conflict between the two of them on the set. But anyway, just as Max von Mayerling had been this great big director during the silent film age in the world of Sunset Boulevard, Erich von Stroheim had been this great director in Hollywood. But Billy Wilder was obsessed with Erich von Stroheim because they were both from Austria-Hungary. And Billy Wilder had, in the 1920s, when he was in Berlin, when he was in Paris, he was watching the films that Erich von Stroheim made, and he was obsessing over them. So he was obsessed with Erich von Stroheim. He used him in several of his films, such as Five Graves to Cairo in 1943. Now that we have the cast set, we're going to go into production history on Sunset Boulevard. So Billy Wilder, he kind of had, they didn't think he had any tact. He had this sense of humor that was kind of, it was bordering on raunchy. So the character of Joe Gillis in the film shows up right as Norma Desmond is having a funeral for her pet monkey. And she mistakes him for the Undertaker. So one of the first lines she says about the monkey is, I put him by the fire. He liked poking at fire and other things with his stick. And that's supposed to be like a sexual allusion by Billy Wilder to this monkey. According to some film critics, Billy Wilder wrote Joe Gillis as a replacement for the monkey. So when they were doing the takes of Norma Desmond and Max being the pallbearers to this monkey. You know, when they're burying the monkey in the garden, every time before they did a different take, Billy Wilder would say something different. Gloria Swanson wrote that she thought Billy Wilder was absolutely hilarious. But there were several times where he crossed the line. So Wilder, like I said, he had a wicked sense of humor. At the beginning of each take, he would say a different joke about Norma and the monkey. So the first take, Billy Wilder said, "Remember, Norma is having an affair with a monkey." Gloria Swanson laughed hysterically. The second take, "Remember, the monkey is your lover." And again, laughter. Third take, "Well, there goes your last lover. You wore him out." She laughed again. "Remember, please, that your lover is in the garden." And of course, laughter. And now, for their last take, right before they did the take, he said, "Now one more time, Gloria, and show us what you feel. After all, Norma Desmond was effing the monkey." But he did not say effing. He said, yeah, which she did not laugh. She did not think that was funny. So, you know, in a sense, Joe Gillis was the replacement lover for the monkey. Now, Billy Wilder played a joke on Nancy Olson because she was in her second picture, and you might have heard of this story. But when they were shooting the scene when William Holden and Nancy Olson kiss on the balcony of the writers' department,
right.
that was a night shoot. Billy Wilder liked shooting day scenes during the day and night scenes at night to make it more realistic. So they were shooting that at night out in the dark, and any overtime hours, according to all of their contracts, they had to pay for food. They had to feed the crew. They had to feed the cast. So there was a big group, cast and crew, including William Holden's wife, Artis Holden, who is known as Brenda Marshall for her brief run as a movie star. She showed up that night too. And Nancy Olson said she was very, very nervous because she was playing this romantic scene, very intimate romantic scene with William Holden in front of this giant crew. And it was like a party atmosphere because they were having dinner, they were having cake, they were having alcohol. So Billy Wilder told them before the take, he said, "Now just hold the kiss as long as you can because I'm going to dissolve into the next sequence." So they started kissing. Nancy Olson had never kissed William Holden before. They just kind of talked through the scene and then they did it. So she kissed William Holden and they kissed and they waited and they kept kissing and they kept waiting and they kept kissing and waiting and kissing. And finally, there was this voice from like below the writers department in that big crowd that said, "Cut, damn it, cut." And it was Artis Holden. It was William Holden's wife, but the whole thing had been a big joke on Nancy Olson. So anyway, another little funny story that we might cut out from Sunset Boulevard.
Hey, but it's kind of a funny little thing.
I know, it's a funny little anecdote. That's what we're all about. Okay, but we do have to talk about the waxworks first.
Oh, of course, yes. Absolutely.
Because the waxworks, as Joe Gillis refers to them in the film, are Norma's friends that come to her house every so often to play bridge.
Yes.
And, you know, he said they were actor friends from the silent film days. And these were actually the people that Billy Wilder hired had actually been giant film stars during the silent film age. So first, H.B. Warner, he had been making silent films as early as 1914. And he had played Jesus Christ in the 1925 Ben-Hur, you know, and some people said, once you've played Jesus Christ, how can you top that? You know, I don't know. Go play Gandhi or Mother Teresa. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, his career kind of was slowly fizzling out until Frank Capra picked him up in 1937 for Mr. Deeds Goes to Town and started using him in his film because Frank Capra was a big film director. And then in 1946, when he made It's a Wonderful Life, H.B. Warner is in that as Jimmy Stewart's boss as a child at the drugstore that he works. You know, and Jimmy Stewart's almost saves H.B. Warner's life. Now, the next person at the table, female, Anna Q. Nielsen, so I have a paragraph on her, was originally from Sweden and originally came to America in 1910 for a short visit. Well, now, Wikipedia says 1905, and the book I was reading says 1910. So who knows when she actually came to America, but anyway, she made her first American film in 1911. So she was the Swedish beauty who had been discovered by a painter, and he painted pictures for the covers of magazines. And so quickly, she was in Manhattan. She quickly became known as like the most beautiful woman in Manhattan because she had these beautiful features. She had all of this beautiful blonde hair. And so there was a movie studio, KALEM, in New York, Kalem Studio.